Back on the Young Turks. All right, we switch gears now. We're going to have, I suspect, a bit of a political conversation. We're going to talk to Jonah Goldberg. He's the editor-at-large of the National Review Online. He's a visiting fellow at the American Enterprise Institute, and he wrote the book Liberal Fascism, The Secret History of the American Left, From Mussolini to Politics of Meaning, a highly absurd book. He's now promoting a book he's editor for, Proud to Be Right. That's also interesting. So, Jonah, welcome to the Young Turks.
Thanks very much. I'm assuming you haven't actually read my book, but that's fine.
Of course not, because it has an insane title like Liberal Fascism. Why would I read
a title
nonsense?
A title that actually comes from H.G. Wells, one of the most important liberals of the 20th century.
Yes.
But hey, it's okay.
No. It's okay, then make the case.
How this is going to work, where you're going to pronounce from the beginning that you think certain things are absurd, but you haven't read. It's good to know. But let's move on.
Jonah, I got a question for you then along those lines. If I wrote a book called Conservative Nazis Like Jonah Goldberg, would you read it?
Conservative Nazis like Jonah Goldberg?
Yes.
No, because that's stupid.
Oh, but liberal fascism makes sense, so that I should read that book. And about how progressives are like Mussolini. That makes a lot of sense, so I should pick up and read that book, right?
Your example is stupid because it's a book allegedly about me. Actually, I would read it if it was an entire book about me. I probably would read it.
I was going to say, actually, you probably would.
At the same time, the title "Liberal Fascism" comes from a speech by H.G. Wells in which he was talking to the young liberals at Oxford University, in which he called for Western progressives in America and in Britain to embrace what he called liberal fascism. He also called for enlightened Nazism. The fact that you're ignorant of progressive history does not justify you calling my book absurd when I'm on the phone with you.
So, Jonah, I assume you don't think there were any conservative Nazis back then, right? Because my understanding of history is that a lot of conservatives in this country were in favor of the Nazis, and certainly the Nazis themselves were conservatives. So if I wrote a book about conservative Nazis, that would make a lot of sense, and I'd go, hey, that was the conservatives back then, including, for example, George W. Bush's grandfather, who did business with them. Conservative Nazis, that'd be a great book, right?
Yeah, that stuff has been so debunked by every serious historian, the Bush Nazi grandfather stuff.
So there were no conservative Nazis. Let's leave Bush aside. There were no conservative Nazis.
Oh, there were certainly American people who you would qualify, and I would probably qualify as conservative, who were pro-Nazi.
Okay.
But
so do you get
no major conservative intellectual that conservatives today revere was remotely as pro-Nazi as the New Republic was pro-Mussolini.
Look, I don't give a damn what H.G. Wells or Orson Welles said in 1920 or 1820. That has nothing to do with me. So when you write a book today about how liberals believed in fascism, can you see how people might be upset by that? Because it's like me saying, hey, at some point conservatives like Nazis, and today I'm going to write a book about how the conservative movement was built by Nazis.
I have no problem with you getting offended by the idea that you can't get past a cover and a title and not even care where the cover and the title come from. The simple fact is, if your personal self-esteem and self-worth and self-identification is so wrapped up in the word liberal, you can't get past that. That's your hang-up.
No. It has nothing to do with my personal
identification. You don't know jack about what I wrote.
Why would I waste my time on a book like yours? There's a million books in the world, and you're going to write about a book about how liberals are fascists, and I'm supposed to waste my precious time reading a nonsense book with that nonsense title? It doesn't have to do with the fact that I'm offended. It's just that I would never waste my time with an asinine premise like that.
Well, the simple fact is you clearly don't know what I write in my book. Right? Because you say that I'm saying that all liberals are fascist.
Jonah, you're on the show. Enlighten us. Tell us what your brilliant thesis in the book was.
The brilliant thesis in the book was that people like you don't understand your own intellectual history, and there's this.
I understand my own intellectual history. I don't understand Wells's, and I don't understand Wilson's, and I don't give a damn about theirs.
Fair enough. If we're going to do this sort of trial lawyer thing where you're going to logic chop every pronoun I use,
I'm going to be logical. Yes, we will be doing that.
If that's the word you want to use. The fact is that the National Socialists of Germany were socialist in almost every objective sense that we understand the word socialist. Benito Mussolini comes out of the socialist movement. He earns the title Il Duce as the leader of the socialists in Italy, not as some crazy right-winger. Benito Mussolini was an atheist. The Nazis hated Christianity. The Nazis were for wealth redistribution, socialized medicine, and all of the rest. The people in the United States who were most enthusiastic about fascism were the progressives, and they're in the progressive era, from the New Republic to most of the leading lights in American progressive thought, were very enthusiastic about Italian fascism. They're also enthusiastic about Bolshevism, more enthusiastic about Bolshevism, but they did not see Bolshevism and fascism, communism and fascism, as opposites. They saw them as similar phenomena. And there has been 70 years of spin and BS from people who like to use this argument ad Hitlerum that anybody who disagrees with progressives must be an anti-Semite or a Nazi. And it is a deeply offensive slander, and it seems to be the one that you've so bought into, you don't even care to be educated against it.
Jonah, but no one here made the argument. I didn't make that argument. You're the one calling people fascist. I never said conservatives were fascist. You came out.
I never said liberals are fascist. You
said the entire history of liberalism is based on fascism. You wrote a whole book about it, and then you connect us to Mussolini, and you connect us to the Nazis. First of all, the Nazis, I know you love to pretend they're not Christians, right? Everybody loves to pretend that. On their belt buckles, it wrote, Gott mit uns, God is with us, right? That doesn't exactly sound like atheists, right? And look, there's a difference that you're entirely missing. Hold on, if we're going to talk about history, let me fill you in, okay? So, look, there's a difference between the right wing and the left wing. So, for example, the Bolsheviks and the communists, et cetera, they wanted the government to take over corporations and take over everything else and to run industry, right? Whereas the people on the right wing, the Nazis, the fascists, et cetera, wanted the corporations to take over the government so that the people that were in power in industry would get to run government, okay? Which is, by the way, kind of what is happening today with the right-wingers.
True. Look, first of all, there's no serious historian of fascism who thinks that's true. Corporations were not. The point was not for corporations to take over government. The point was for government to take over was to guide and overly regulate and essentially socialize the hearts of human beings and of large institutions. And the corporatism, which is a technical economic term for the economics of fascism, was exactly the kind of thing that inspired the New Deal, which most of the people who actually planned it had anything to do with the New Deal knew about. In terms of the Nazis being Christians, it is laughable. The Nazis, first of all, banned...
So they were kidding about that God was with us, right?
Well, their notion of God, I'm not saying they didn't believe in God, but if you look at Hitler, if you read Hitler's table talk, what he has to say about Christianity, if you read what all of these guys had to say about Christianity, the fact that they banned the teaching of Sunday school, the fact that the SS songs all rejected Christ, rejected the church, embraced this sort of neo-Norse BS. Right? The idea that
Jonah,
these guys...
Here's what you do. Here's what you're doing. You connect things that you don't like with current people that you're against, right? So you say, look, the Nazis are like the atheists of today because they didn't like... But on the other hand, for example, you could have picked Ben Franklin, who also did not believe in Christianity. You could pick Thomas Jefferson, who ripped parts of the Bible out, right? And then you can say, aren't those people wonderful? But no, you didn't. You say, okay, look, the liberal atheists, they're kind of like not Jefferson or Franklin. They're like Hitler and the Nazis, right? Do you see how that might seem like you're cherry picking and just trying to paint people as Nazis, and that would be highly offensive, as you pointed out a couple of minutes ago, saying, I can't believe anybody would do that. It would be highly offensive.
Yeah, well, but that's just not what I do. You're assuming that I do that.
You wrote a whole book about it.
It's just simply not what I do, and it's not in the book. It's just not in the book.
Oh, but you just said that the whole history of liberalism is about fascism. That's exactly what you do. You just said the whole history of liberalism is about fascism, and you're connecting that history to the current. So you think, because this is interesting, if you say it has nothing to do with current-day liberals, nothing at all, fine, then we move on.
I don't say that.
So you do say that. You do connect them. So you're saying that you're connecting current-day liberals to fascists, aren't you? Isn't that the point of the book?
Look, you, along with a vast number of contemporary liberals, work from assumption that somewhere in the DNA of contemporary... Work from the assumption that somewhere in the DNA of contemporary conservatism, right, somewhere, not saying that, I don't think you accuse contemporary conservatives of all being Nazis, but the assumption that is built into contemporary liberalism is that the further you get away from liberalism, the closer you get to Nazism. That socialism
but nobody ever said that. I didn't say that. I didn't write a book about that. You wrote a book about how liberals are fascist. So you're projecting in your mind, hey, everybody who doesn't agree with me is evil and a Nazi and a fascist and a Bolshevik and everything else. And you're saying, I think that. I didn't think that. I never said this in an interview. I never said it on the show.
But, dude, all I'm saying is that you don't know what my book is about, and you keep asserting.
No, you just told me what your book is about. And you just said a minute ago that you connect present-day liberals to fascists. You just said that, didn't you?
Yeah. You do know that the word connect and equate are different words, right?
Okay, so they're just connected to Nazis. They're just, but not exactly equivalent. I don't know why I didn't read the book. I should have seen the connection. Okay. So
yeah, look, if you want to look, I'm glad to debate this with you. But all I'm going to say for the record, not like a lot of your listeners give a rat's ass, or that you do, but you really do not know what the hell you're talking about in terms of what I wrote my book about.
Okay, and period. So by the way, it's just to connect all the dots, and we're talking to Jonah Goldberg, and he's now also the editor of Proud to Be Right. So the Nazis were liberals, and the communists were also liberals. They're dictators taking over the government, so they're all liberals. Is there anybody not a liberal who's a bad guy? Is there anybody who was right wing? Anybody at all in history? Was Genghis Khan right wing, or was he also a liberal?
Look, I don't know who you're pandering to or why you're making a jackass of yourself. I know lots of liberals who are wonderful people. I don't think that all contemporary liberals are Nazis or anything close to Nazis.
Are you not merciful? But I'm asking you, I asked you a question about history. Is there anyone who killed anybody? I mean, the dictators, the Nazis, the socialists, the dictators, were they all liberals or were any of them right?
No, of course not.
Oh, thank God.
There are lots of bad... I don't make the assertion that there's no such thing as a bad conservative or anything like that. I think, for example, Franco, who wasn't a fascist, but he was a bad dictator. Pinochet was a bad dictator. There are all sorts of people who are bad right-wing dictator. There are all sorts of bad people who were right-wingers. And I'm ashamed for some of them. The racists in the 1960s in the United States were overwhelmingly right-wingers. And that is something that I think conservatives should be ashamed of.
All right, great. No,
I don't do what you claim I'm doing.
Okay, no, just the Nazis and the communists. But that's okay. At least we got a Pinochet. Okay.
And I don't say that Nazis and communists were liberals. I don't do it. I don't know what you're talking about. I mean, unless all you do is read, asinine left-wing blogs all day and you take everything they say as gospel, I don't know where you're getting this from.
I don't want to go over what we just went over 7 times about how you wrote a book connecting fascists to liberals and how you claim you don't do it. It's okay, maybe I'm slow. All right, so listen, let's talk about contemporary politics, right? Because these guys are proud to be right. And for example, there's a guy in the book that you're editing here who says that it makes sense for gay men and women in this country to be Republicans or conservatives.
Yeah.
All right, run that one by me. The Republican Party, and certainly in 2004 and historically, have run campaigns against gay marriage, against gay rights. How would it make any sense for a gay person to be Republican?
Well, the guy who wrote it is a guy named Jamie Kirchick. He's gay. He's a friend of mine. Mm-hmm. And he's making the argument, trying to persuade conservatives to change their position on things like gay marriage. Because he says that on a whole host of other issues, gays have not necessarily all gays, but lots of gays have a natural home in the Republican Party when it comes to all sorts of other issues. I think it's a perfectly legitimate argument to make, but I don't think anything in his essay says that, gays are stupid for not being Republicans right now, even though about a quarter of gays, I think, still vote Republican anyway, because not all of them define politics by gay marriage.
So his argument is general. That's a fair argument. That's a fair argument, and I had gay conservative friends in Washington, D.C. when I lived there, and I get it. But the argument rests on, hey, they don't like us, the Republican Party doesn't like gays, but they're good on other stuff, and they're going to cut our taxes. It's an interesting argument, I mean, because that doesn't define all that they are, but it seems like that's a tough argument to make to gays in America, right?
Well, I don't think personally that equating opposition to gay marriage is a one-to-one relationship with not liking gays. I know gays who don't really care about gay marriage either, right? So there are other issues.
You know some fascinating gays.
I'm sorry?
You know some fascinating gay guys, because so they say, yeah, take away my rights, it's okay, I got no problems with it. And if you take away my rights, I know
take away what rights? They don't have the right yet. You can't have it both ways. ways, right? I mean, it's not like gays have
You
the
haven't
right.
taken
and
away their
Republicans
right
are
'cause
taking
you
it
never
away.
gave
They
it
don't
to
have the right yet.
That's awesome.
I'm sorry?
That's awesome. You can't take away their rights because you never gave it to them in the first place. Okay,
Well,
if you think that's a compelling argument for gay
I'm
Americans.
correcting your language the way you correct mine, right?
Okay, all right. If you think that's a compelling argument for gay Americans to become Republicans, okay.
I don't think it's a compelling argument for gay marriage. Do you do this? with all your guests,
I
or
said
you
for
just do it
gay
with conservatives?
Americans. I said for gay Americans to become Republicans. If you think that's a compelling argument, okay, Reed, proud to be right. All right, now, Jonah, one other thing. Here's the thing I don't understand, right? You're worried about the government taking over, et cetera, and I'm worried about too much government control. For example, I'm worried about corporations. You know, we talked about fascism before, controlling our government. For example, the Wall Street guys who bought all of our politicians and continue to get not just bailouts, but the Federal Reserve giving them trillions of dollars, et cetera. So I'm sure you're against all of that, right? So we should have Wall Street reform that does not allow them to take risky derivatives bets, for example, with what is indirectly taxpayer money. You agree with that, right?
It depends on the reform. I think I don't like the bailouts. I think that you know, public choice theory guys have a lot to tell us about when regulators get in bed with big corporations and liberals and moderates call it reform. What really they're doing is setting up a system for perpetuating bribery. I'm for getting rid of all ag subsidies to big corporations. I'm for getting rid of anything that could be remotely called corporate welfare. What I want is for the government, you know, to stop getting in bed with corporations at all. And my problem with the approach that people like Barney Frank and others have to big corporations is basically what they want to do is get government and business more closely entwined. That these regulations basically mean that these big corporations on Wall Street and elsewhere almost by necessity have to lobby the government because their profit margins are going to be determined by what regulators and congressmen say rather than by what markets say.
Right.
So I'm for a radical separation of government and corporations.
Right. Those poor guys, they have to lobby the government. They're choiceless. It's not that they wanted to buy the politicians and buy the system off to eliminate the competition. What could they do? The government made them do it. Look, Jonah...
If government sets what your profit margins are going to be, your
Jonah,
business is going to be about influencing government. That's
No, they don't set the profit margins. What part of the Wall Street reform sets profit margins? No part.
Take utilities. It's a lot easier, right?
Okay,
utilities,
we're talking about Wall Street
set by
reform.
corporations.
No. Let's
Well,
not.
look, and I'm trying to simplify the point so I can make my point, which is simply that you know, there are lots of businesses that have to have a buy your leave from regulators. Now you have under Sarbanes-Oxley, and you have under this new stuff with derivatives and all the rest. Look, I am for clamping down on some of that kind of stuff, and that's fine. And
Honestly, I don't believe you. Okay, because here, let's
that's fine.
and
now
I'll tell you why.
And you're ignorant.
No,
okay.
no, I know.
Okay.
I know. I'm ignorant, and I come from fascists. I know that. So listen, my question is very specific because I think it's going to show it. Look, for example, I don't believe that the banks which have federal deposit insurance should be able to gamble with the depositors' money by putting the money into investment banks, their investment bank side. So I believe in the Volcker rule that we should split those two entities. Do you agree with that or no?
Okay.
That was in the reform. Yes. Do you agree with that or no?
I'm torn about it. I generally don't like it, but I'm open to persuasion about it. I truly haven't made up my mind about it.
All right, look, that's fair enough. And look, Jonah, the reason I tell you I don't believe you is because I just read an article, for example, today, and my guess is that you're going to support these guys. The Republicans in the Senate, so Richard Shelby and Lamar Alexander, et cetera, said if they get into power, their first objective will be to get rid of Wall Street reform. See, that tells me that they have no interest in any reform or regulations.
Oh, okay.
All they want to do is sell out to the Wall Street banks and give us that corporate control over government.
Can I ask you a question then?
Yes.
Why did Barack Obama and the Democrats get vastly more money from hedge fund managers and Wall Street than the Republicans did in 2008?
That's
vastly more money.
I'll tell you. That's a good question, and I'll tell you two things related to that. One, they did because the Republicans crashed the economy, and so the guys looked around and said, "Hey, you know what? Maybe if we keep electing Republicans, we'll all be bankrupt. So let's try a Democrat." And then what wound up happening? When the Democrats wound up trying to reform Wall Street, they said, well, that's not what we wanted. So now they've flipped and are giving vastly more money to the Republicans to try to get back in charge. So that's how it went down.
And you honestly believe that? You think you actually think that cartoon version of history is correct?
You're talking about cartoon versions of history. That's funny.
I am, because
Okay, all right.
Look, you're going to boil down the decisions of all of these Wall Street tycoons and these Wall Street businesses to the idea, we have to punish the Republicans.
You asked me no. You asked me a simple question.
They're bought and paid for, but, oh gosh, now let's give all our money to Democrats. That's your explanation about why this happened.
Look, you asked me a simple question. I gave you a simple answer. If you want, I can get a lot more complicated than that. But if you're trying to get me to say that Democrats are also bought by Wall Street, hell yes, they are. Did you see what Chris Dodd did? I think that reform effort was a joke. I would have gone 100 times tougher. And Chris Dodd hates Elizabeth Warren like you guys do because she would actually protect consumers.
So basically, here's my problem with your position. I will try to do it as a non-confrontational way as possible. Every time we have some sort of economic calamity, the idea that comes forward from people in government and from reformers, let's call them, is that the government needs to get much more involved in these matters, right? And
already untrue. It depends on the situation. Some things call for regulations, others don't, and it depends on the regulation. Of course,
it depends on. I agree, it depends on the regulation, and I'm sure there are counterexamples to it. But I cannot think of a major financial scandal going from Enron on through, or the accounting stuff on back to the oil crisis of the 1970s, where the answer from government wasn't more government.
No,
right?
Look, the government is...
And every time that happens, then you create an incentive for more people to get involved in government. Walmart and Microsoft had almost zero lobbying presence in Washington as recently as the year 2000. And then all of a sudden, Orrin Hatch and a lot of other people started wanting to regulate what Microsoft was doing, and Microsoft started spending billions of dollars on lobbying, or hundreds of millions of dollars on lobbying. Same thing with Walmart. Once the left went after it, Walmart all of a sudden said, gosh, now we got to get in the business of lobbying government.
Jonah,
big business are like beehives. The more you mess with them, the more they come after you.
Jonah, we're totally out of time, but let me address those points as quickly as I can. Walmart is not this saintly creature who's like, oh, golly gee, well, look, I never wanted anything from the government. They're making me lobby.
I don't think it's a saintly creature either.
Okay, hold on. You know what happened with Walmart? The Walton family has actually given millions upon millions of dollars to conservative think tanks and to politicians to try to buy them off so that they will lower their estate tax because it will save them hundreds of millions of dollars. So you found a very curious example to pick. Those guys couldn't be more guilty of trying to buy politicians than almost anybody in the country because they have hundreds of millions of dollars to benefit. Do you not get that?
I get that.
Okay,
that's
all
fine.
right, good.
Look, I mean, the idea that, first of all, the idea that they bought off all these think tanks, I'm not sure you're not talking out your ass on that, but that's fine. The idea that somehow people aren't going to, it's a very strange sort of cognitive dissonance that the liberals have, that somehow the smartest and rightest thing for labor and union and poor people to do is to vote solely on their economic interest, to organize based upon their economic interest. But then when rich people organize or act on their economic interest, it is instantaneously derided as evil and illegitimate.
No. Look, we're going to have to end on this, but I get that the Waltons act on their economic interest. I get that they want to pay less in estate taxes. The question is, what should we do for the good of America, not for the good of the Waltons? So I'm not blaming them. I'm blaming the politicians who get bought by them. But that, we're going to have to leave it right there. Okay.
Fair enough.
All right,
okay.
Good. So, hey, look, we reached some sort of agreement at that, and I knew we could do it. Jonah Goldberg's original book was on liberal fascism. The new book that he edited is called Proud to Be Right. Thank you for joining us, Jonah. Young Turks.